I'm going to talk a little bit about how I was trying to integrate sustainable, discussions about sustainability into introductory drawing classes. It can be a little bit tricky, right? Because we have very specific things that we're trying to teach them, right? Technique-wise, we're trying to make sure they get a variety of different kinds of media that in drawing, as well as developing skills and challenging them. So I chose this project to be at the very end of the semester, so this was their final project, so that way they already felt comfortable with the media. Charcoal itself, I don't know if for anyone who hasn't worked with charcoal before, it's very flexible. If you look at it wrong, it will move. So it's a perfect medium for utilizing for something like stop motion animation, where you're constantly moving and erasing the particles to create your image. So the idea was for the students to create a short charcoal stop motion animation, which depicts like a narrative that connects either themselves as an individual or just like any individual to a larger global sustainability issue or solution. And so the main thing I was trying to get them to do was to find a way to connect themselves to something that is very high level, right? Whenever we talk about sustainability, these very large ideas and very large solutions like reducing emissions or, saving trees. Sometimes it's hard for the students to see themselves in the solution because the solution is kind of abstract. So the goals for this project were, for one, for them to research and personalize, so to understand all of the different approaches to sustainability, for us to talk about it a lot, for them to talk amongst themselves and figure out maybe things that they didn't know about sustainability or climate change issues that were important, and find a way to connect themselves personally to it. And then two, just get used to change. There's something about sustainability and that as far as it goes for my individual education about sustainability, I keep learning new things that keep replacing old things that I've learned about ways to approach certain issues or have certain conversations. So what better time to get them used to change than having them constantly erase their work and know that it's okay for ideas to change over time, and it's okay for their drawings to also shift quite a bit. As well, I did want them to kind of generally think about how very small actions kind of add up to these larger stories. Frame by frame, right? They're drawing, they're potentially making hundreds of changes to their drawings to make a video. And so seeing that, all of that add up to this one continuous narrative, I think is something that's very empowering. And so in terms of evaluating for these objectives, I really wanted them to come up with their own. I wanted us to collaborate basically on what the standards would be. This is something that was new for me, that I have never taught before, and I wanted them to also feel empowered that they were making a video that they wanted to make under particular conditions. So we all discussed as a class all the different elements, right? That it's smooth, that it's not too jumpy, that the frames are smooth, so it's not very, very fast in the beginning of the video and then it ends very, very slowly. That there's a particular mood or emotion they're trying to portray with their artistic choices. Also incorporating transitions to move the narrative along, so we looked into that. Also general craftsmanship, and then optionally they were, if there was time, they would add sound effects or have an opening or closing title slide. So the tricky part with this assignment is that, if you have a narrative, some students finish drawing a little bit sooner than others. Some were drawing up until the last minute. So giving them the flexibility to add sound, to add meaning onto their videos, or to incorporate slides at the beginning or end really helped them have a much more well-rounded video. So first we can get into how we kind of dug into the research and got them to connect individually to this content. So first off, we tried to define sustainability in general. So we kind of brainstormed things that people thought were sustainable or were sustainable issues. So we kind of made lists of issues and solutions, and we also tried to identify as well the difference between, timelines, right? So something addressing climate change, the timeline's going to be shorter. So technically, all of those things that you do to reduce emissions are sustainable, but they also, the timeline's a bit shifted, right? Because you're trying to prevent the rise of temperatures by a certain amount by a certain date. So that's a little bit different than more general sustainability issues like, I'm blanking, but electric cars or waste or plastic waste, things like that. So in order to get them to really dig in to, solutions and how the individual actually relates to some of these larger changes, I actually had them complete this quiz on CNN. And so I will take a second to pull it up. Let me see. Business can see it. So this is based off of the Project Drawdown, and I don't know if anyone's seen this. I'm happy to drop the link for my slides into the chat later so you have it. So essentially you go through and you rate the solutions based on which one you think is most important, and then you can see how you did. And so this was very interesting because a lot of, we talked about all of these different solutions and issues, came in and then tried to put some of it to use. And what we think is going to make a huge difference sometimes doesn't make as much of a difference as other things. And as well, something that's interesting about this quiz is that it also tells you, based off of these icons, right, what things you can do individually and which things are something that industries or policymakers can do. So, for example, food, that's all individual, but then there's things like how do we move people and goods? Well, I don't know, unless they're going into shipping, maybe they aren't going to be able to individually address shipping goods more efficiently in terms of the systems and structures that allow that to continue. Things like installing green roofs, unless they're getting into green roof design, that might not be something they can individually make a difference in if they're not in that industry. So I think that this helped them put into perspective some solutions that they had already started talking about, and as well seeing that with some of these solutions it can be tricky for them to individually connect, but that some they might have more of a connection to it individually. So let me get my slides back up. I imagined this window sharing to go a little bit smoother. Okay, so they completed that. Then after that, we kind of discussed the issues that arose or the surprises that they found as they worked through that. And then we also took a look at Project Drawdown as well as the SDGs at the UN, just so that way we could expand their view a little bit more. So if there were things that they couldn't quite connect with via the quiz, they could find additional solutions or issues that they could identify with. And then after that, they chose one topic, and I really wanted them to think about how they could map change from themselves all the way up to the issue or solution. So we used this socio-ecological model of change from this very lovely book called Making and Being. And this model kind of shows like the layers of change, right? And that individually you can make a change today, but then maybe in order to make a change in your community, it might take a little bit longer. So as you move through these rings of change, it might be just a little bit slower. And so thinking about how those issues related to themselves as well as to historical forces, or even to the earth, the soul, mystery, spirit. And so this is an example of one of the students' work of trying to connect their issues. And so I believe that this was, they were talking about decolonization and thinking about that because they are from Indonesia, and there's quite a lot of mining and resource extraction that happens there. That is kind of the result of ongoing colonization in the area. And so they map that out all the way from the larger historical issues all the way to themselves. And I think that this helped put into perspective, some people chose topics that were really hard to connect to individually. One student chose, electric cars, and it was a little bit more difficult to relate that to themselves as an individual because they just buy an electric car. So the shift towards like historical change was a bit difficult to connect, and it was hard for them to kind of bridge some of those gaps. So then they switched to another topic that they were able to more deeply identify with. So we were kind of working through these things. So second, we were going to get used to change. So we had them do a lot of research in terms of their own drawings and developing their ideas, and at each step allowing them to change along the way. So we showed some videos about William Kentridge and his charcoal animation work, so they had some examples. There were also some other charcoal animations that just were generally sourced via the internet, so that way they were able to see kind of how other people have approached charcoal animation and different techniques for transitions or setups, compositions, how those move and interact with each other. And we did some group critiques and discussions about what made some animations stronger than others in terms of the narrative they were trying to present. So that way we had an idea going into it what we wanted to do. And so then they kind of did some conceptual drawings, trying to figure out, what symbols they wanted to include, how they were going to create a particular mood, as well as, thinking through the sequence of it a little bit, but keeping things a little more general. So I told them to be as abstract as they wanted with these, so that way they could really aim for trying out some different techniques or feelings. And then we also did some storyboarding, so mapping out how these stories that they had constructed, how they would change throughout the course of the video, and think through some of the transitions they were going to use. And so at each step of this, all the way from the concept drawings to storyboarding, some of the ideas changed a lot at each step, and it was totally fine because things change. Sometimes you think an idea is going to work out and you try to outline the beginning, middle, and end of it, and it doesn't quite fit together. So they were getting used to shifting their ideas quite frequently. And then everybody downloaded this app, which is actually free. There's a lot of flexibility with how to use this, and there's also an ability to add sound effects, so that was something that they added. And there's also a stop motion studio app as well that they used to take photos of their drawings as they were working through their actual stop motion videos. And I wish I had a photo of the setup of how we got their cameras over their pieces of paper, but we essentially had the drawing room all to ourselves because this was a summer class. So we taped some pieces of longwood together and made little baskets for their phones. So with a lot of duct tape and weighting down, we ended up getting, a way to get their phones like directly over their drawing papers. And so they worked on those, developed them, went back, added things, and then here are some of the videos. So I thought I would share with you guys a little viewing of the students' work. So here we go. All right, and whoop, let me get to this next slide. There we go. Oh, that's the same one. Here we go. Yeah, so this one, the student was really inspired by the sustainable development goal that involved like the education of women and making sure that birth control is widely available, so you can have children when you want to, so you can go and get an education, or delay certain life milestones until later when you can handle them. So it's a combination of education and birth control access. The previous one was also primarily plant-based diet and regenerative farming, and the first one was describing issues with paper use and mindlessness of paper use. And then finally we have our last video here by another student. Yeah, and then that is, all right, so yeah, that's the gist of everybody's work. And yeah, it was a really special project. They were able to really get invested in their topics and research them, find images that, they used as source material, look up quotes and facts, and they worked really hard on these every day for like a week and a half, and it's probably some of the most focus I'd seen in them from like the beginning of the semester. And the summer is always really hard because it's the summer. Everyone wants to be outside, so it was a really special project to be a part of, and especially with such a small group. We only had 7 students, so that was really fun to do.